Somebody once said that the internet can make anyone immortal, and given Shrek's domination of the internet, for better or for worse, he's the perfect example of that, but this isn't about his impact on culture or the memes. We're gonna go back to where it all started with the movies. So let's take a look at some of the things you may have missed in the Shrek franchise. Spoilers, I guess, but that's more on you for not seeing these by now. It's been like 20 years, man, come on. So, Shrek's origins come from a 90s fairy tale by William Steig that he wrote at the ripe old age of 83, but his name actually comes from the German word Shrek, which means fright or terror, and considering his whole thing is being feared by people, yeah, that sounds like the perfect name for the swamp dweller. That version of Shrek, though, is a little more aggressive than the one DreamWorks created, but his overall personality is pretty much the same. It is pretty interesting to see how that changes over the course of the franchise, though. I mean, he's still very feared up until the last movie, but, you know, it takes baby steps. Keeping up with some info before Shrek even hit the big screen, who was supposed to play him actually went around for a while before Mike Myers was able to put his Scottish mark on the character. Bill Murray was Spielberg's first thought to put on the mud-filled shoes, but then that turned into a race between Leonardo DiCaprio and Tom Cruise, for some reason, before landing on Nicolas I will act in almost anything Cage, although he bowed out due to not wanting to be seen as an ogre by children. So then Chris Farley was Shrek until his unfortunate passing, which is then where Mike Myers stepped in. Since then, there have been a few others to step up for video games and other adaptations, but Myers has remained by far the most iconic. Janine Garofalo was also initially attached to the Farley version, but once that version was scrapped, she was fired, although she says that they fired her without even saying why. On the other hand, Eddie Murphy remained on the project as Donkey, and you can even find clips of Eddie's donkey talking with Farley's Shrek. Another wonderful thing, only possible by the internet. But Farley's early departure didn't mean that they couldn't at least reference him through one of his well-known SNL characters. When Shrek's taking a not-so-happy Fiona to Farquaad's castle, she starts asking about him, and after some tiny man jokes, Shrek makes one last joke while using air quotes. The way this connects all the way back to Farley is that he had a character on SNL that was notorious for not really knowing how air quotes worked, and really just used them as a sort of sentence enhancer. Considering the sad events and the project having to be restructured, it's really nice that Farley was still able to make it into the movie, in some way at least. Another real-life influence on the movie comes from Eddie Murphy's Donkey. In the movie, when Donkey and Shrek are going to save Fiona, Donkey says that he's the Stairmaster, which is something that Murphy's character in The Nutty Professor also says. Well, one of the characters that he plays in that movie at least. That's not the only line taken directly from another movie either. After Shrek and Donkey cross the bridge to where Fiona is being kept, when Shrek says to Donkey, "That'll do, Donkey, that'll do," that's a reference to Babe, a nice family-friendly movie that was produced by the guy who made Mad Max. He also wrote, directed, and produced Happy Feet 1 and 2. That has nothing to do with anything else in this video. I just think that's super weird. And when Shrek and Donkey wrestle the guards when they first get to Duloc, Shrek says, "Try the veal," which was popularized when it was said in The Godfather, but was also just something that you would hear at any Italian restaurant. So the origins on that one are still kinda in the air. Now, going from movie references to historical references, let's talk about why Robin Hood in this movie has a French accent. It's not just because the French accent is funny and makes for easy jokes. Well, actually, that is what the director Andrew Adamson said was the reason behind the accent. But since Robin Hood takes place in England sometime during the 13th century and was a minor noble, Mr. Hood most likely did have some type of French influence either through blood or through the rule at the time. So the short is that they just wanted to include a different accent, and since they already had a few European accents, it made sense. But the long is that they unintentionally made one of the most authentic Robin Hoods in popular media. Funny how you can be right for all the wrong reasons. This next one is a subtle but great piece of character work in the movie. The measure of a good movie is always the little moments that never seem important but give the movie character. So after Farquaad's been eaten and Shrek and Fiona share a kiss, all the windows in the cathedral are shattered due to the love blast. Except for one, and because it makes sense to just break the glass and start over, that's exactly what Dragon does. But if you look closely, the little piece that's still there after she smashed it is her. Even after eating the man, she still had to rub it in just a little bit more, and you know what? I respect that. Good for her. Okay, last one for the OG Shrek, and although this one is a little bit more popular than the others, I just really like this one, so it's getting included. The three bears from the Goldilocks story, Mama, Papa, and whatever the kid's name is, are all shown in the movie when Farquaad is rounding up all the fairy tales, but when we get into Farquaad's castle, we see that Mama Bear became a very nice, but very sad decoration on the floor. But don't worry, when everyone's partying, you can see Papa Bear has found someone new to dance with. Now, I don't think that it's my place to say when a person, or bear for that matter, should move on from their last relationship, but this one seemed a little quick. Hopefully, the kid is okay at least. Alright, now for the sequel, let's start with something that almost no one in the target audience of this PG movie would have realized. When Shrek is running away from the knights on Donkey, who has been transformed into a white Bronco, this will be important later, the movie is animated to look like the show Cops. It is extremely similar to the freeway chase led by O.J. Simpson back in '94 where he was driving a white Bronco. Now the Shrek series in general has some pretty raunchy jokes and references that went over kids' head back in the day, but this one is a real wild one. I mean, imagine if... Another real-life reference this sequel makes comes when we first see Fiona's childhood room. While Shrek is trying to sleep, we see that directly above her bed, under the canopy, is a poster of a Sir Justin, who is pretty obviously a reference to Justin Timberlake, who had yet, at this time, not brought sexy back. But what makes this even more interesting is that at the time of this movie's release, Cameron Diaz, who played Fiona, was dating Justin after they met at the Kids' Choice Awards, because where else would you meet people circa 2003? Their relationship only lasted 3 years though, but this wouldn't be the last time Justin would be in the Shrek-verse, but let's not get ahead of ourselves just yet. Now, Timberlake was pretty popular in the early aughts, but no one, and I mean no one, was more popular than Spider-Man, and this movie just had to have a reference to Sam Raimi's first Marvel project. So when Shrek gets caught in a trap early in the movie, Fiona saves him, but not before they recreate the iconic kiss that Peter and MJ shared in an alley. It's also a nice inversion of the original as she comes to save Shrek like how Pete saved MJ. And when you think about it, comics are kinda like an American version of fairy tales if you squint hard enough, so this works based on the lore of Shrek 2. Love when I can tie things enough to make a point. Didn't say it was a good point, but it's a point nonetheless. In a more direct reference to a fairy tale and not an Adam Sandler movie, Jill with no Jack around can be found when Shrek first wakes up after turning human. She even fetched him a pail of water. Hopefully, she didn't leave Jack on the hill waiting for her to come back, because he's probably gonna be up there for a while then. In a later movie in the franchise, we get to see a different version of Jack and Jill, and they seem to have it together, but they also turned out to be bad guys, so maybe worrying about the relationships of fictional characters isn't really worth the effort. This next reference comes when Fairy Godmother gives King Harold the magic love potion. The potion is marked with a Roman number 9, which makes this Love Potion number 9, which is a reference to both a 1959 song by The Searchers and a 1992 movie that, from what I could find, no one actually likes and has pretty much been forgotten by everyone. Which is kinda like what the Love Potion would do to Shrek if Fairy Godmother got her way. I don't think DreamWorks would be that rude to the movie, so we're just gonna say that they just really like the Searchers song and leave it there. Alright, now let's talk about Fiona's fighting styles. So early in the movie, back when Shrek was caught in that trap mentioned earlier, we see Fiona beating up some not so friendly townsfolk, and the moves that she uses shows how she spent her time while cooped up in that tower in the first movie. She starts out using Chun-Li's spinning bird kick and finishes the last dude with a classic This isn't even the first pop culture move that Fiona has used either, as she honed her inner leather-clad hacker by doing a bullet time kick in the first Shrek. It's just too bad that there isn't a Blanca reference that I could find in the series, but there is a 5th movie supposedly on the way soon, so I guess we'll just have to wait for that one to see if it continues the Street Fighter love. For the final thing in S2, let's look at the biggest edible man in the movie, Mongo. So Mongo himself is a collection of different references to things. His name could be a reference to Mongo from Blazing Saddles, which is a movie from the 70s, which means it's out of my range. Him tearing through the kingdom is like pretty much any kaiju, or it could even be a reference to the American kaiju, the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man from Ghostbusters. And when he sinks, he tells Gingy, "Be good," which is the same thing that E.T. said in E.T. when he was leaving. For such a big character, I'm glad they were able to fit so many references in, especially when he's in the movie for only 4 minutes and has even less screen time. Okay, so I know that this one isn't the most fondly looked at movie in the franchise, but it's got some pretty good stuff that you might have missed, especially since most people probably didn't watch this more than once. The first one that we're going to talk about comes from Fiona's mom, Queen Lillian. After she headbutts a wall to break it, just go with me, she starts to hum two different songs. One from The Sound of Music, and the other from Mary Poppins. These aren't just random songs though. The actress who played Queen Lillian, Julie Andrews, won both an Academy Award and Golden Globe for her work in both movies, respectively. She's also been dubbed a dame by Queen Elizabeth for her work in the arts, so she ended up being a really great choice for playing royalty in this. Now, when you think of Shrek, one of the first things that you think of, not including the memes, is probably gonna be All-Star. It's almost like you can't think of one without the other, and even though it's not something that you can miss in the first movie, when Shrek the Third came around, they found a sneaky way to include it again. When Shrek goes to find Arthur, who's played by Justin Timberlake, told you he'd be back, if you listen to the song that's played during the school assembly, you can hear that it's an instrumental version of the beginning of All-Star. It's definitely not something you'd notice if you weren't completely locked in, especially when it's being played with the sound of a high school assembly crowd in the background. Smash Mouth songs in general have a pretty strong connection to Shrek, with their version of I'm a Believer being used, as well as Story of My Life being used in the trailer for this movie. They really just don't stop coming, huh? Boo! You remember how Gingy lost his legs when he was tortured in the first movie, and you see him with frosting stitching at the end doing his best Tiny Tim impression? If you ever wondered how he rehabbed back to full strength, and why wouldn't you have, we finally got that in this movie, even though it's just a quick part of his entire life montage. But what's interesting is that in that part, you can hear the $6 Million Man sound effect, and even the treadmill scene is a direct homage to it. For those that don't know, the $6 Million Man adjusted for inflation to the $25 Million Man in 2021 is like a toned down and frankly less interesting version of Inspector Gadget. And because $6 million isn't even that expensive in America's healthcare system, there's been talks to reboot it with Mark Wahlberg as the $6 Billion Man, but that's been in development hell for more than about 15 years at this point, but glad to know that they thought it was that important to show us Gingy's recovery, but they don't explain why Rumpelstiltskin looks completely different from this movie to the next. Oh yeah, he's in this movie too. Bonus thing. To round out the trilogy, let's talk about a potential lawsuit over some coconuts. So in the very beginning of the movie, during Prince Charming's play, we see a guy using coconuts to mimic the sound of galloping horse hooves, which is a reference to Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Cool, but that's actually where the problems start. So Eric Idle, who played Merlin in this movie, is one of the guys in Monty Python, and he said that he thought about suing the producers of the movie because that was joke stealing. Now that in itself seems like a pretty good joke to me, but you never know who's serious about these types of things, and I'm not well versed in joke law to be able to say one way or another. For the fourth movie in the franchise, you could just say that the whole movie is a reference to It's a Wonderful Life or even the Santa Claus 3. It's a weird mix, I know, but it works. But instead, I want to talk about some series continuity. So in Shrek 2, the villains all hang out in this place called the Poison Apple. But after most of them are reformed, or just left I guess, the Poison Apple turned into the Happy Apple, a place so safe that you can have children's birthday parties there now. And if that's not a ringing endorsement, then I don't know what is. Considering how important it is in the story for Shrek to change, it's nice to see that other minor characters or even buildings have the potential to change too. Finally, the last thing that you may have missed is the fact that Puss in Boots had a movie at all. I'm just joking. Kinda. Anyway, there's a bunch of different interesting references and gags in this one, like references to both the Dos Equis commercials that followed The World's Most Interesting Man and Old Spice commercials with Isaiah Mustafa, to references to Fight Club, and even another kaiju reference specifically to Godzilla 98, down to the fight on the bridge. But the one that makes me the happiest is when someone says that Puss's boots are made of soft Corinthian leather, which is a reference to a commercial in 1975 that starred Ricardo Montalbán, who also starred in a movie with Antonio Banderas and Salma Hayek, and that movie is the masterpiece that is Spy Kids 3D Game Over. Truly one of the greatest films of our time, and I will be lobbying to try and talk about that more on this channel. Don't you worry. Movies like Shrek have a lot of different references to them, and that's kind of the point of them. They're like onions. The more you peel back the layers, the the more things you find, and there's even 2 holiday specials in the SCU that we didn't talk about, but considering that they were direct-to-TV specials, I assume that a lot of you missed these entirely anyway. I know you didn't, Greg, in the comment section, but everyone isn't you, Greg.